Hey sightseers, Sightseeing Sally here. Today we're going to do something a little bit different, considering that this weekend is the big weekend of the end of summer. Rather than try and get out and film a forgotten town, historic place, because pretty much anywhere we go is going to be like crazy nuts with people. And Marty and I are also trying to squeeze in that last hurrah for summer. And especially because there's just been a lot of stuff going on in the world of Sightseeing Sally. If you didn't know, check out my last video. I thought instead I'd share with you a place I know fairly well, and that's Krivitz, Wisconsin. So this tour of Krivitz is going to be kind of more an informal, down and dirty look from a local's perspective of what people find when they come to Krivitz, what draws people here, what the locals kind of see when all the tourists come up, that sort of thing. Because again, this weekend is like the last hurrah, the last big weekend where tourists converge upon Krivitz, well, and the local area. And so you're kind of going to get a flavor for what it's like when you're local and you have all these tourists wandering through your town. Now, if you look off in the distance, beyond my car, you'll see vehicles moving. That's Highway 141. It's the main drag and typically gets really congested about this time and continues to be super busy on through the weekend, because if you were coming into town, it would most likely be on this highway, which runs north to south, with north being that way and south being that way. And like a lot of small towns these days, there's a Dollar General on the outskirts of town. Now, a lot of people that come to town usually make Pelican Smoky Meat Market their first stop, because if they're coming up to this part of Wisconsin, they're likely staying at a cottage, an Airbnb, or a campground of sorts. And this place here is where people like to get their meat. You know, because we're all about grilling out, eating brats, steaks, burgers on the grill in summer. Otherwise, people stop at Witt's Piggly Wiggly here. And if you're a local like me, you know better than to stop at Piggly Wiggly on a day like today. Except, lucky me, Marty sent me on an errand to pick up some adult beverages for this weekend. Now that I got that important job out of the way, let's move on to showing you around Krivitz. Actually, it wasn't too bad in there, considering today is Thursday, right before the big weekend. Better pay attention to traffic. Now, if you look, you can see where I filmed my intro. It was at the Historical Society Museum, which, I hate to admit this, I have never been to. All these years that I was coming up to Krivitz, and then now that I live up in the area, I've just never found myself here. I kind of wonder how many other tourists don't find themselves here. But because we're here after hours, we won't be able to find out the answer to that today. And then directly across the street from the Historical Society Museum is the Krivitz High School, which is another place here in Krivitz I've never been to either. But given that it's on the snowmobile route, I'd be willing to bet that there are some kids that ride their snowmobiles to school in winter. Now, just down from the museum is this church. And there's at least 2 other churches that I can think of here in town. And then, of course, you got your gas stations, your McDonald's, Quaker State Oil Change Center, Big Woods Realty, an insurance agent, Farmers Merchants Bank and Trust, Quick Trip, which is new, but not quite as great as the Buc-ee's, if you ask me. And then one of Marty's personal favorites, the Family Dollar. I think you can get the gist that this area here is the main business district in Krivitz. And like I mentioned earlier, there are just certain times where you don't want to be anywhere near it because it's so busy. This here is Main Avenue, and again, there's a lot of traffic, mainly because it's the big weekend. And on this street, you'll find Krivitz Lumber Company, which, on a side note, the original building burned down not too long ago. And as you can imagine, it was a huge fire, given what's there. And then across the street from Krivitz Lumber Company is this little building, which up until a few years ago was a barber shop. Then it changed hands and became a nail salon, and now doesn't look like much activity is going on there. But the reason I bring it up is because Marty has this huge fascination with it and keeps saying to me, what if we bought it and moved into it and lived there? Personally, if I was going to pick a tiny house to live in on Main Avenue in Krivitz, I would pick that brick one over there. From the date inscription, you can see that this is probably one of Krivitz's more historic buildings. To be honest, I don't exactly recall what used to be in here. It might have been an insurance agency, but most recently it had been turned into a gift shop, which unfortunately didn't do very well, and I don't even think they lasted maybe 6 months to a year. Although it's possible they could have been open longer than that, and I just don't know, because I never went in there, which is something I'm quickly learning as I'm touring Krivitz with y'all, is that I probably haven't been in about 3/4 of the businesses here, even though I've been living up in the great big North Woods in this area for 5-6 years now. I guess that just means I need to get out more. I don't know. Moving along, I have, however, been in the Krivitz area library and have gotten ice cream from the iceberg. Now there's another building I suspect has some stories to tell. It's set back from the street so you really don't notice it as you're driving by, but I suspect it's an older building. That's the thing about Krivitz, is that as you walk around town, as you drive through the neighborhoods, you'll notice the lack of historic buildings. And I really don't know why that is. By the way, that's the pharmacy, in case you were wondering. Especially compared to some of the other towns we've explored. Like Kewanee has all those old historic homes, and some of the other towns like Lena still has quite a few historic buildings in its downtown. So I don't know, without having done too much research on this, just kind of walking around and showing you Krivitz, I really can't tell you. Standing here, I just noticed this house next to the pharmacy. I think I found the perfect place to live on Main Avenue in Krivitz. It's as if it was meant to be. Standing at the corner of Main and Wilbert, you can see off in the distance the village hall, another church, and then this open space here where they have on Thursdays what you would call like a farmer's market or flea market. And then opposite of that, you can see the Krivitz feed mill. And yes, I've actually been in there. We do stop in from time to time to pick up dog food mainly. But if I were ever to get in the business of raising chickens or ducklings, this would be the place I'd come. Can you imagine that? Us raising chickens where we live? I'm thinking the neighbors probably would have something to say about that. But Marty keeps bringing it up like, I don't know, maybe we should get some baby chicks. Wow, can you believe that? Almost 5 seconds of silence and no traffic. So far, you're probably wondering what exactly is there for tourists to do when they come into town, and I'll get to that here shortly. I just want to show you a new business that opened up called Let There Be Light. It's a resale department store. And yes, I've been in there. And then just a little ways down from that is the New Care Convalescent Center, which you can ask our friend Jack about that place. And no, I haven't been in there. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, next door to New Care is Duke's Service Station. Now, in all the times I've been by here, I have never seen this place open, leading me to believe that it's a relic left over from days gone by. Well, we've made it up to the corner of FJ and Main Avenue, and if you head up that way, which we will in a little bit, there's a couple of parks I want to show you and an airport. Yes, surprisingly, Krivitz has its own airport. But the reason I stopped here was to show you the Blue Star, which, if you were driving into Krivitz from this direction, the Blue Star, aside from the two parks I'm going to show you, would be the first touristy thing you would come to. And that, by the way, is Highway W. Since I have never actually been inside there before, I thought we'd take a quick peek in, so one, I can say I've been in there, and two, so you know what's in there. Do those look familiar or what? Looks like they got a little bit of everything here. But moving on, I think we're going to take a gander down FJ Street next, and then after that over to Henrietta, which runs parallel to this street. As you can see, FJ Street marks the end of more of the commercial side of Krivitz and gets you into the residential area, with the exception of a few places like the veterinary clinic, Fuzzy's Bar, and the post office where I had my P.O. box. Keyword being had, I decided that it just wasn't worth keeping a P.O. box open for the very little bit of mail I used to get. So if you decide you want to send something to Sightseeing Sally, don't send it to P.O. Box 742, because I don't know who it's going to end up with. Well, it isn't going to be me. As we're circling back to Henrietta, I thought I'd show you one of the more historic places here in town, the cemetery. Now, I haven't walked through here, so I can't say for certain how old the graves are. Yet, judging from some of the headstones, I would think that there are some that are older, probably from the late 1800s, if I had to guess. And now that I think about it, in all reality, there's only one other place here in Krivitz that I can think of that would have any historical context yet to this day. I know I said I wasn't going to get into any of the history, and I have shown you a few buildings that I suspect are remnants from the past. I will take you over there because I think after we go over to Henrietta and you see what's really here for tourists to do, it'll explain why Krivitz is the way it is. Or at least help to explain it. Like I said, I didn't do any research. This is just an off-the-cuff video to show you around town. Well, we finally made it over to Henrietta, or Henriette, depending on how you pronounce it. It's one street over from Main Avenue where we were at, and we're in the section that I would consider to be more touristy. Only because this is where you have your gift shops, and a place called the Hummingbird Cafe, the Style and Heart Boutique, Oak Hill Treasures, and Briars and Brambles, which is actually that little gift shop I was telling you about in that building on the corner. So good for them. They're still in business. They just moved. And as you can see, lots of traffic. It'll continue to be busy like this throughout the entire weekend. And then when Labor Day comes and things start to settle down, maybe not quite as much. Now that I've shown you just about everything that would be considered touristy here in Krivitz, with the exception of like a strip mall of businesses that you can find going north on 141 out of town, you might be wondering, why do tourists come to Krivitz? See, the thing about Krivitz is that it's not your typical touristy trap type town. Krivitz is an old logging town. It wasn't originally built with the intention of being a tourist town. This, by the way, is the place I was thinking of that would still have some historical significance here today in Krivitz. But getting back to the story about tourists. The thing about tourists is that they don't come to Krivitz for tourist trap places. Instead, they come to eat, drink, buy their groceries, get their gas, because if you recall, we're up here in the Northwoods of Wisconsin. People aren't coming up here for tourist trap Walt Disney type stuff. They're coming up here because they want to play out in nature. You know, boating, fishing, swimming, hunting, UTVing, all the great things that the big North Woods of Wisconsin has to offer. In other words, when tourists come to town, they're looking to eat, drink, be merry, and pick up whatever it is that they forgot to bring from home. And that, sightseers, is Krivitz in a nutshell. Until next time, this is Sightseeing Sally. By the way, I haven't been indoors yet either.